Welcome to the PM Express Business Edition. Today, we're focusing on the sector that employs a larger chunk of the population. This sector actually ensures that there's food on your table. But in the wake of COVID-19, how are we assured that we're going to have food every day on our table? How is the sector being supported? And in terms of financing that sector, an institution is said to be playing a leading role to ensure that the required funding are provided. That is Agricultural Development Bank. What role are they playing to ensure that this sector gets the required funding in the wake of all these challenges? Are we assured that the sector will actually be funded, or because of COVID-19, we're experiencing some challenges? We're looking at funding the agricultural sector in the wake of COVID-19. My name is George Yafe, and we'll be right back after this break. Welcome back from the break as we look at funding the agricultural sector in the wake of coronavirus. How will the sector look like? Will things actually change, or because of this, funding will suffer? Well, one institution that is playing a lead role or a leading role in terms of funding the agricultural sector is ADB. And are we going to get the assurance from them that indeed they will continue to fund this sector? Well, there's no other person to engage on this special occasion as the Managing Director of ADB. Thank you so much, Doc.
Thank you.
And how are you doing? I mean, it's been quite an interesting year, some would say, right?
Yeah, very interesting, which has also brought about new ways of doing things. So even though we have a lot of negatives, it's also an opportunity to create some positives for the way forward for the bank and for Ghana as a whole.
I mean, I've followed your footsteps in the banking industry, and there are some you follow development on the international market. And will you call this time a very challenging time for you in terms of banking career? Or listen, we've seen this before. It's a challenge that always comes. We're going to get over it.
Yeah, there is a challenge. There was a challenge, but we don't expect that this challenge will perpetuate and therefore have very significant impact on the banking industry. We are going to get over it, and there are already signs. I always talk about the fact that if the economy is good or is moving well in the right direction, the banking industry will also be doing well. The banks exist in the economy. So once you see a robust economy, you're likely to have also a very efficient banking industry, especially in Ghana, when issues involving trying to put the banking industry in good shape, recapitalizations that occurred, new regulatory frameworks. It's really toughened the banking industry for this COVID-19. I was just thinking recently that if the banking industry had not been strengthened post-COVID-19, pre-COVID-19, it may have been a disaster. But I think the banks are strong enough. The industry has been really strengthened, and it has really absorbed the shocks without any bad ramifications.
How strong are the shocks to withstand the rough roads and the manholes ahead of us?
Well, I think when you want to look at the strength of a typical bank, the main thing is the capital. Then also as a result of the regulatory frameworks, you build a robust balance sheet, which the banks have done. Some banks with lower strength have been put together. So you can really see that these things were done as if regulators knew that there would be COVID-19, even though they didn't know.
Actually.
Yes, they didn't know. So I think it was a good thing that happened to the industry before this exercise, COVID-19 came.
How is ADB doing? I mean, the New Agricultural Development Bank, ADB, and all the rest. How is the bank doing now in terms of your whole operations, one would ask?
I think ADB has to be judged by the public, especially our customers. And if that is anything to go by, what I'm hearing, calls that come in these days, comments that we hear over radio programs and TV programs, if that is anything to go by, it means ADB is doing well. But talking about the details, ADB, since 2017, has performed creditably well. And I'm referring to 2017 because a new management came into being at 2017. And before that, ADB was running into losses. Since 2017, ADB has been profitable and year on year, and we are expecting to move even higher. The profitability aside, the outlook of the bank has really improved, and I think Ghanaians know that now ADB is virtually a household word. When you are out there, you see ADB's presence, and also ADB's contribution to the government's main program, agribusiness, is evident out there.
It's good that you talked about agribusiness because, as the name suggests, ADB, Agricultural Development Bank, and there are some who've raised concerns about the fact that maybe you're doing so well, but you have lost your core focus as leading in funding agriculture or the sector. What do you say to that?
Yeah, I think that was, or that is a historical belief. It belongs to the past. 2017, ADB has moved astronomically into their core mandate, that is agribusiness. And we are not doing the same old things that the bank used to do. We are really bringing innovation into the system. And the agribusiness participants or stakeholders are very happy. And we are not doing it on our own without certain key institutions that have been established, and some ministries, like Ministry of Food and Agriculture is key. Ministry of Trade is key because Ministry of Trade controls 1D, 1F. So and Ministry of Finance. And tagged to it are all the institutions which I will mention later, and also with the regulators backing. That's Bank of Ghana.
Because the concern is that for a layman, I stand outside and I see ADB as more of a universal commercial bank than a bank that is playing a lead role. I mean, educate me or help me out whether I have not been abreast of the current happenings of the bank. That listen, in terms of portfolio, we are still doing a lot for agribusiness and the whole value chain when it comes to agriculture.
Yes, ADB was established with focus on agriculture. And it was among a group of banks that were supposed to be developmental in nature. I can remember Bank for Housing and Construction, which was supposed to be for the housing sector. There was also, and then NIB, National Investment Bank, that was for industry. There was also once Cooperative Bank. So you could see that that was the drive to establish financial institutions that are developmental. Now, developmental requires that you have medium to long-term funding to be able to achieve the goals. However, you could see that there was a missing link. So basically, these development banks were mobilizing short-term funds for seeming medium to long-term goals. So it became an issue, and the regulators decided that, well, we are instituting universal banking. And if you want to define universal banking, it's like a supermarket, financial supermarket, where you sell everything.
Yeah.
Now, time has lapsed, and with the change in policy drive or economic policies, it became obvious that ADB has to go back to its core mandate, that is agriculture, and even go further to create value chain agriculture, which we call agribusiness. Hitherto, when you say agriculture, people know that you have a cutlass, you have a hoe, you go and then you clear land, but that has changed. Now we talk about agribusiness. It's a whole value chain, starting from primary agriculture to storage to processing, to marketing, and even haulage. So agribusiness now is a very holistic and huge industry. And with that definition, you straight away conclude, and that is the case in some of the advanced countries, most of the advanced countries, that agribusiness becomes the backbone of the economy.
But do I get from you that in terms of playing a critical role in this chain, ADB is there? Because again, sorry for perceptions and then views out there. In terms of portfolio, loan book, I mean, there are other players and banks who think that they are doing better than ADB, even though you are supposed to play a lead role.
Currently, you know, ADB has the larger portion, or contribute to a larger portion of the agribusiness sector in the total risky assets portfolio. ADB has the structures for funding agriculture, and not agriculture at only the high level, but from the basics right through to the top. Many times you hear that agriculture is risky, and colleague banks will not stop at quickly pronouncing that. What ADB started doing from 2018 is to try and de-risk the risky assertion for agribusiness or agriculture. And I can explain. When individuals are playing or are contributing to agriculture as a whole, individual entities, some in poultry, and even for poultry, they will be doing a certain level of poultry. If it is perennial crops, they are doing, or tree production, tree type of production, they are doing a certain level of it. When you do that, all the risk aspects raise their heads. Because if you produce maize and you overproduce, I'm saying overproduce relative to the demand at a particular time, the risk comes in because you would suffer losses. especially where you don't have good storage facilities. So that was the time. Now what ADB is doing is to do a complete value chain funding for almost all the categories of agribusiness, which means issues concerning overproduction, lack of infrastructure for storage, products or agri-products going bad, no more exists. What is even key is that it is one institution, and to do that, we needed to control the whole value chain. It is not a situation where you pick an entity in the value chain, do the financing, hoping that another financial institution would take another entity to complement. We decided that we didn't want to take the risks, therefore we are taking control of the whole value chain. So for example, if it is in the poultry sector, we feed mills, we take control, we will do the financing. If it is the primary side in terms of a hatchery, we will also do the financing. If it is production, actual rearing of the birds, we do. Processing, we do. And then marketing, we do. Also, there are linkages along the line is in terms of even veterinary services and those who produce like the soya, the grains for the feed mills. We take control. And we don't only do that, we try to link them. And that is an aspect which will take me some time to explain.
I think that, Doc, is a very, very interesting thing that you've explained to us, but some would also want to ask that is your funding touching the right spot that will again stimulate the growth of the sector? Because we've had a lot of funding over the years for the agricultural sector, but still it is not taking the commanding lead of the economy in terms of stimulating growth. And I know the Scott Sales has just released the GDP figures, and still the sector is suffering. Is it that you're not giving it the right attention? Is it that the funding is not well targeted? Or maybe you have to, again, review the whole process again in terms of funding the agricultural sector?
Okay, we started from somewhere, and if you want to change, it also takes a little bit of time. I think looking at the Honorable Finance Minister mentioned that the country was spending about $274 million to import poultry meat. The demand for poultry meat is 400,000 metric tons, the demand. And we are producing only about 57,000 tons. So, and we are importing a certain level, and so there's a gap of about 162,000 metric tons. So Ghanaians really then have to depend on external this, and poultry meat is one of the most sensitive protein source in our country's diet. And therefore, any solution to agribusiness in terms of how much we depend on external sources, if you tackle poultry, you have targeted the right thing. So now you see that the direction is specific targets. And that is why we had to, as a bank, try and sit down and see how we can solve the high importation on the...
And what are you doing in that direction in terms of making sure that we produce a lot locally and then we cut down on importation?
We have done a lot, and recently I'm sure you have heard that we've come out as a bank with a model which we call the poultry, the broiler value chain poultry project, for which the first pilot has been successfully implemented in terms of disbursement of funds. And ADB decided that we are earmarking 500 million Ghana cedis between this year and 2022 for the broiler poultry project. I talked about a value chain, and it's a distinct product that has received a lot of smiles from participators. So we start, the chain involves the hatchery, the feed milling, the production, the processing, and then the marketing. We try to put individual entities and groups together and link them so that one's output becomes another's input. And we, as a bank, we are also controlling how much at each level of the value chain, how much the output should be, and how much another's input should be, so that there is a balance. And then we monitor strictly. We are doing this together with some technical and support from Ministry of Food and Agriculture. We also have Ministry of Industries supporting. Then we have the institutions, special institutions that hitherto did not exist. And one of them is GESA. Yeah. We also have OVCF, which is now tying up strictly with ADB for this project. And so you see that in terms of infrastructure, things have changed. There have been more additions. And internally, ADB, because the question will be, what about other banks? We are streams ahead in terms of trying to make sure that our internal structures support the agenda. So 2018, latter part, we used to have Agric Finance Department, which is a one department, finance and agric. And that is why, that is what contributes to the concentration in terms of maybe smaller numbers. Straight away we upgraded the Agric Finance Department to Agribusiness Division. So hitherto we had a head of department. Now we have a general manager, agribusiness, and with a lot of divisions, units, including veterinary services, what have you, infrastructure, and those things. So internally we have moved up our capacity, and that is what is going to produce the numbers, and it's already started showing in terms of this innovative product that almost everybody is applauding.
I'll be taking a break very soon, and when I come back, we'll be focusing more on the COVID-19. With all these plans that you have put in place, are things going to change because of COVID-19, or rather, it's going to strengthen your hand to increase the loan book? And whether, again, have you done your own assessment to establish whether the problem with agriculture is a funding problem, or is about tweaking the value chain to ensure, because you have a lot of people in there, and still we are having challenges in terms of funding. This is the business edition of PM Express, and you're looking at COVID-19 in the agricultural sector. In terms of funding, how should it be structured to ensure the sector doesn't suffer and ensure that you indeed have food on your table? This is the business edition of PM Express. My name is George. I'll be back after this break. Welcome back from the commercial break. This is PM Express Business Edition as we talk about COVID-19 and the agricultural sector. And it's about funding and the institution that is supposed to play that leading role, Agricultural Development Bank or ADB, and what are they doing to ensure that when it comes to getting the required funding for the sector, it is not disrupted in any way. I'm talking to the Managing Director of the bank, Dr. Kofi Mensah, about what they are doing. But let's get proper into the COVID-19 issues. And Doc, you've explained to me a lot of things that you are doing. Now this comes, this storm from nowhere. Is that going to push your book or increase your book for the sector? Or now it's about food security, so the targeted funding is going to sectors that can ensure that we are secured as a country in terms of food security?
Okay, there are a lot of details of it. ADB alone has a total loan book currently at about 2.4 billion Ghana cedis.
And this is targeting the total value chain?
No, this is total loan book.
Okay. Yeah.
For all sectors.
Okay.
Out of that, about 0.6 billion Ghana cedis is for agribusiness. And what we are saying is that we want to move the proportion of our loan book in agribusiness to a minimum of 50%.
Of that 2.6?
No, of a bigger value. The 2.4 billion is the total loan book as at now.
Yeah.
We are projecting that by 2022, we would have moved to about twice that. And out of that, 50% should go into agribusiness.
Is there not a scenario, sorry, Doc, about self-government now and self-government in the future? What about some who say that, Doc, maybe you have to do it now?
Yeah, so we've already started. So if the time was available for us to trace the incrementals, you will see that from last year, it has started increasing. But our 3-year business plan that we put up this year was to push the numbers. So we've gone through about 6 months. So we are already on track. And that's why you are hearing a lot about ADB's funding of certain key areas of agribusiness. We've already started, and by 2022, 50% of our loan book should be in agribusiness. When you talk of agribusiness, 2 main issues come into, cost of production. And cost of production is dictated somehow by the price of the funds or the cost of the funds to the stakeholders or the participant. And ADB has found a very good way of trying to get over those issues. And that is why it is no more an issue of an area which cannot be entered. You only do it at your own peril.
Doc, if I'm a farmer, and since you talked about poultry, to this whole poultry production, maybe I'm looking at about 2,000 beds and all the rest. How cheap is your loan, or how competitive is your loan that Georgia, I feel, as a farmer at Mantiman Kebi, can still get access to ADB funding to develop his poultry?
Okay.
Or still the commercial rates and the other universal bank are offering?
Okay. This is a business plan internally, but since
that's my business plan.
I have to share it. I have to share it. You cannot use a bank's pool of funds to finance agriculture to make it very lucrative and also give it the needed push for economic growth. So sitting down, what we have institutionalized, and this one, we have already completed a document that we are expecting the regulators to give their consent, because we need to inform the central bank. we are creating a balance sheet within a balance sheet. Meaning, we are creating a balance sheet for agribusiness. So that if you know a typical balance sheet, you have your liabilities where the funding is, and then your assets, which is the portfolio you create by funding agriculture. So what we are saying is that we are seeking concessional funding or funds, both from within and outside the country. And instead of putting it in the bank's pool of funds, because in the bank's pool of funds, we deal with weighted averages. If you have some cheaper fund from somewhere, you have what is a little bit up, you put it together, the average comes up. So you're saying that we are sourcing for strictly agribusiness lending concessional fund. Then we put it on the liability side of the bank's balance sheet. So the agribusiness division will then create the loans, and I said, based on these cheaper funds, so that the output in terms of pricing will be cheaper for the users. Then on a month-to-month basis, we look at what agribusiness has done. So we are going to assess agribusiness, not based on the bank's overall cost of funds, but on the concessional funding that is on the liability side of their balance sheet. So if they are getting funds, let's say external funds at 2% per annum on, let's say, USD, based on all calculations, they should be able to give create loans at cheaper rates. And that is why in the model that we have just initiated, and with agreements with the MOFA, GESAL, OVCF, we are not going to deliver interest rate at more than 10% per annum.
And that's what I get from this new facility that you put together.
That is it.
So again, and sorry, no conflict of interest. No. If I judge you, I feel that as a big farm in Mantimankidi, and I meet all the proposals, the guarantees, and all the rest. I'm going to get a facility for you at a per annum of 10%. Yes,
not more than 10%. And one will ask, how would you do that? Three main directives, just to repeat it. We have, let's say, getting the concessional funds from providers or lenders. You have OVCF, that is also giving very concessional funding, because they used to have about 17%. Now they are prepared to move to even below 5%. We have already had a meeting and agreed on that. We have GESAL. GESAL provides guarantees to the banks for the funding of agribusiness, up to about 70%. So if I'm a bank and there's an entity ready to absorb 70% of my risk, and normally this were before the GR, Ghana reference rate, we had the base rate, and the base rate, we see that banks envisage a certain level of loan loss provision, and therefore contributes to the higher pricing of the loans. Now, if an entity is taking up 70% of your possible loan loss, it means that side is...
But Doc, then some will still say that with all these partners on board, maybe give this loan to me at 5% or 2%, if we are really committed to supporting the sector that you are playing a lead role.
Exactly.
If someone is taking 70% of your risk, where's the worry again, Doc?
That's the maximum that GESAL will take. It doesn't mean that for all your loans, 70% is absorbed. It ranges, but the maximum is 70. So that is why our pricing, we are saying that the maximum will be 10%. We didn't say it's 10%.
So I can get 2%?
It depends. It depends.
My books are good, my proposal is solid, the returns are good.
It may not be so, but at least you can start from about 5% if it's a very good proposal. with a lot of
apart from this poultry, and since you're talking about COVID, because there have been several researches that sort of suggest that there are possible spikes in food prices going up and all the rest and all those things. And we place some of these things on the doorstep of ADB because of your role you're supposed to play in the industry. Apart from this poultry financing deal that you're doing, which could again ensure that our poultry, our feed and then protein doesn't suffer, what else is ADB doing in this space of COVID-19 to ensure that when it comes to emergency funding and all the rest, these farmers, these players in the whole value chain get access to it? No, even though we know it's not free cash.
That's right. There's also an agreement we have concluded and we have started on the rice value chain. Why rice? You can see that poultry is on the protein side. Ghanaians are very much eager to always take poultry products. When you go to carbohydrate side and other minerals, you see that rice is a staple and high level of importation of rice. So we've also concluded on agreement with OVCF, GESA, and others on the rice value chain. We studied the system together with Ministry of Agric and Ministry of Industry, and we saw that. We have producers of rice, that is the primary production. We have the millers, and we have the marketers. The marketers are those interested in importation of the huge deficits that we have as a country. The millers are those who take locally, the local production. And we noticed that the millers have weak balance sheets, whereas the marketers have very strong balance sheets because they are importing and selling, putting all their margins on it. But they are using the country's scarce foreign exchange, which also puts pressure on the value of our local currency, the cedi, which will eventually culminate into some stagnation of the economy. So the gap between the producers and the millers has to be taken by financial support at concessional lending. So we have fixed ourselves in there, and government has made it that any financial institution that wants to support the rice value chain can fit itself in between the producers and the millers.
But Doc, do you think that it's just about, I mean, this is a sector that you have a lot of informal players that are in there. Do you just stop at providing the financial support or some level of technical assistance to ensure that, again, they pay the money back, even though you have a good of ensuring that there's food security? The money is not cheap funds. You're not for the Christmas. They pay the money back on time.
That's a good question. I initially said that to stem this high level of even importation of the poultry meat, which government is spending $375 million. I think earlier I said 275, but it's 375. What we are saying is that if we are controlling the whole value chain, what is the purpose? The purpose is that we want to ensure whilst contributing to the economy, ensure that our funds are safe. And that is why Ministry of Food and Agriculture is now tasked. They are doing this in collaboration with us to provide us a lot of technical support, which will go direct to the participating businesses. They are giving us technical support. GESA is giving us technical support because GESA has a lot of consultants in there. Ministry of Trade is giving us technical support through the consultants they have for 1D, 1F. So we have a pool of consultants which is going free of charge for...
Again, to the risk as well.
Yes, again to the risk, and also to ensure that our funds that we put in there is safe for our shareholders.
Doc, do you think that in terms of providing the required funding in this era of COVID-19, you've done what you're supposed to do as a bank to ensure that when it comes to the funding side, you've played the role. The others could be regulatory and policy support to ensure that when it comes to food security, at least we can be assured of fairly decent and very moderate prices on the market.
That's right. Yes. When COVID-19 was at its peak, I was looking at, on the telly, I saw some countries where people are prepared to die for food. There was one truck moving with food. People just scaled on top and were buying it. That is the issue about food. COVID-19, the impact of COVID-19 would have been worse if Ghana was ran out of food, or Ghana was short of basic food. But because of the policies of government, planting for food and jobs and all that, you saw that on the food security side, we were okay. Because one of the basic security issues is food. If you run out of food, people are prepared to do anything. And you're going to play a role to show that. Yes, and that's why we are coming out with innovative ways, other than the past where it was just business as usual.
Doc, I mean, do you think that, again, and you might have the research at your table, that with respect to the challenges with the agricultural sector, is it a funding problem or it's about a policy? Because every farmer is crying that I cannot get funding for what I'm doing.
I think things are changing now. It's a combination of factors. I always say that when you have the policy direction towards a certain target, that is 70% of the work done. Because government policy will have to support private sector if the private sector has to move the economy towards a certain direction. So when you have a government saying that agribusiness is a key to me, then it's 70% of the work done. Then comes the financial support. And the financial support is, you have to leave it to the banks to do the funding. But government, because their policy is towards agribusiness, will create the enabling environment, especially the establishment of all these key institutions. It was done by government to support. So it's a holistic thing. And then technology has to be infused into the way we do our production. When you say poultry, it's not that the other type, where you go, you put sawdust and now you visit the poultry farms, modern ones that are springing up. It's a battery cage system, and you are marveled.
And look, as we wrap up on this, another key thing I wanted to get your thoughts about non-performing loans, and I know it will be a big challenge for you looking at the sector that you cover. And as we ramp up on this whole discussion, for you, what do you think is the best way around it in dealing with this non-performing loans, which you look at it and you ask yourself, it's too much?
Yeah, I think as a bank, what we have done is to reinforce our non-performing loans of the past. We have a certain significant level of non-performing loans, so we've reinforced it. What we are saying is that whatever new deliveries that we are doing under the current de-risking processes and modern processes should not create any significant additional. We have a division that is covered to make sure that the non-performing loans come down, because those were historical, starting from 2009, 2005, thereabout. But now, we are delivering quality assets because of the mechanisms we have put in place.
Do you think that the national ID could play a significant role in this?
Yes. Yes. And we, from our e-business side, are even talking of creation. In fact, there's already a specimen which we are seeing where we can target our farmers electronically, know what is happening to them in terms of certain basic performance indicators. And we get to you immediately through technology. And so the whole infrastructure build-up has progressed very well. And I think the economy will gain on top of it.
But Doc, with all these wonderful plans and the good things ahead for ADB, as you wrap up on this discussion and COVID-19 agric financing, one would ask that. So when would, again, no conflict of interest. George Afe have an opportunity to be a shareholder of the bank. You back onto the public on the market. You used to be there. I mean, I see a very prosperous bank that Ghanaians can share in the bank and even help you with your additional fundraising.
You know that there were a lot of issues beginning 2016 thereabout. The bank is listed or was listed, but it's still listed. We haven't delisted the list yet. But shareholders, I'm sure, are going to make the way forward very clear. We have a new shareholder who has entered, that's GAT. And together, we're going to build a system where Ghanaians will participate in the ownership of ADB. Because ADB, the projection is that it's going to grow very fast. It's going to integrate well in the economy. It's going to be a backbone. And therefore, we need the Ghanaians to have more interest in it so that...
I cannot wait for that to be a shareholder of Agriculture and thank you so much for your time. So this has been the business edition of PM Express as you look at funding of the agricultural sector in the wake of COVID-19. You had the MD of ADB and what the bank is doing to ensure that at least when it comes to food security, providing the required funding, they play their rightful role. Well, if there's any problem, I'll come back again to the MD to ensure that whether they did play their role or not.
You are always welcome. And we are inviting the elite, middle class and top class to go into agribusiness.
Okay, I'll be the first person to do that.
That's fine.
Thank you so much and have a great day. This is PM Express Business Edition. Have a great day.